Hello.
Přednáška proběhne v anglickém jazyce, tak doufám, že jste na to všichni připravení a asi se můžeme pustit do toho. Děkuji, že jste přišli.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Is it okay with the voice? And it's hearable, yeah? Is this thing work? Okay. Yes, the topic of the lecture is actually directly connected with my master thesis. I study art history in Germany, in University of Art and Design in Halle. And I decided today that also would love to share with other people and to maybe get some feedback. What do you think about these ideas? What do you think about this approach to contemporary art, to religion? And the topic is extremely complex. Yeah, also, as you can see, it's a lot to unwrap. It's a huge topic. So, and today I think it's important also to say it as a foreword. Of course, I'm not going to cover all contemporary art and all spirituality because it doesn't stop. But what I would like sort of to talk about is the relationship between art and religion, how it changed, and to try to propose a method or some sort of optique, a way of seeing contemporary art within another paradigm, within the paradigm of spirituality and within the paradigm of sacral spaces. And the topic is, of course, directly connected to the historical conditions that we find ourselves in. And one of my interests in this topic, it was that basically, even though art initially was basically from the antique times, inseparable from religion. Basically the word art and the art as we know it exists as a concept appeared only recently, relatively recently, like in Renaissance. Everything before was not art in the way how we see it. It was used as a means to communicate with another realities, particular objects, like icon, like here in the picture, was not viewed as beautiful or as a particular aesthetic. It was a literal presence. It was a way of communication. And I thought that was a very interesting approach. And somehow contemporary installation art made me think also more and more that contemporary art is not that far from that approach as we usually think it is. Even though religion is a very tricky topic, because, well, first of all, because it's getting more and more sort of to private area. We live in the age where religion doesn't play a major role anymore. It doesn't dominate over our social life, or our work life, or our spiritual life. Spirituality becomes something that everybody chooses for himself and doesn't have to sort of publicly discuss, and it doesn't have this regulative function anymore. However, it's also obvious that even though contemporary art doesn't usually like to talk about religion, a religious topic, it's still becomes, for me at least, more and more apparent that numerous works of contemporary and modern art appeal very, very strongly to spirituality, but they appeal to the spirituality beyond the institutionalized religion. So beyond the Catholic or Orthodox Church, but the connection, the desire to talk about spirituality and to have some sort of a experience that we would classically call religious experience is still there. It didn't really disappear. And as a way of trying sort of to understand the sacrality and sacred spaces, I turned to the Mircea Eliade. He is a very famous, very influential historian of religion of his time, which is basically the second half of the 20th century. And he came up with this concept with the term hierophanie. And hierophanie, basically, it is when something divine, something that's from other world, reveals itself, manifests itself in a material reality. So it's when basically divinity comes into a particular form. Like here at the picture, yeah, you can see that this tree is being treated as not just as a tree, as a usual sort of flora, but as a god. That the god find as an expression himself in this tree. And there is countless examples in basically every religion that Eliade also demonstrated that has this approach. Yeah, this approach when sacralic items actually manifest itself just around us suddenly. And he called it hierophanie, and basically claimed that basically all history of religion, from the most primitive to the more sort of complicated, composed of this multitude of hierophanies, so manifestation of the sacred realities. And he says there is no break between the most elementary hierophany, such as the manifestation of the sacred in a particular object or a stone or a tree, and the highest hierophany. For a Christian, for example, it's incarnation of God in Jesus Christ. So it is always the same mysterious process. The holy other, a reality that is not of our world, however manifests itself in objects that are integral parts of our natural, or profane world. So there is this there is this distinction. There is a profane world, normal world, ordinary, boring world, and there is this sacred world, this other world that is hidden somewhere. It has its own sort of logic. It has its own life. But these words, there is this point when they meet, and different objects and art as well, for example, as icon, this is this medium object where this meeting becomes possible. And this concept of hierophanie gave another development to a new theory that was developed by a Russian art historian, Alexei Lidov, that he called hierotopy. It's, every scientist that respects himself, he should come up with a new term always, like to market himself and brand his intellectual thoughts. So Lidov, he also decided he need one, and he called it hierotopy. Hierotopy, which is basically means sacred space. And this theory, which is, of course, he develops from the Eliade concept that we just discussed, he took, but he put the focus on the space, which is quite important for, will be for my further analysis, because space and sort of spatial experience of the artwork, I claim is one of the crucial, basically, arguments of why contemporary art and sacral experiences are met. And what is hierotopy? Hierotopy, it's a type of creativity that deeply rooted in human nature. In the process of self-identification as a spiritual being, man first spontaneously and then deliberately creates a concrete milieu of his connection with the transcendental world, creation of the sacred spaces can be compared with pictorial creativity, which also belongs to visual culture and appears spontaneously at a very early stage of personality formation. So basically what Lidov says is that when we are creating a sacred space, first of all, it's creativity. And the second of all, which is his distinction from Mircea Eliade, is that Eliade still more or less was talking about this in categories, yeah, this divine reveals itself. While Lidov says it's a human activity. Humans came up with a concept of a church, or with the concept, yeah, of a temple, of totem, yeah, and so on, different forms. If humans came up with this, this means we can understand it. We can understand the logic behind it. And this what makes this process not mystified anymore, yeah, not mystical anymore, but we can see what was the goal and how the goal was realized. And another important note is that when he talks about the space, the sacred space that's being created, he's not only talking about the church, yeah, or like a physical space. He talks also about the paintings, for example, because paintings also working with the space. Paintings also try to compose, yeah, they try to communicate with the viewer to give him the sense of divinity, of sacrality, of some revelation, and so on and so on. It can be in a text. A text, yeah, biblical text, can also working on creating this sacred space. So it's not only in this frame of the literal space. And basically, what does it give us? It gives us that, and what of the main claim of Alexei Lidov is that Hierotopia may include a mystical component, but it is primarily a conscious creative process of shaping sacred spaces through architecture, images, rituals, light, sense, and other media. So it's not just one thing. Yeah, it's not just, it's a complex. It's smells, it's touches, it's light, it's a lot, yeah? And this is what he brought new in this sense to the art history, is that basically the classical art history always views objects a bit distant from its context, yeah? It sees, for example, it sees altar pictures as a flat image. Most of the art historians, for example, yeah, art history was built in the 19th century as a separated discipline. They all studied this Renaissance art from a black and white reproduction of a book, yeah. What does it bring? It brings that they didn't thought about the space where the pictures were. They didn't think that it's not only about one image, but the image is a part of the whole church architecture, and that the image is incorporated in creating a sacred space. And there was a critique, of course, of this classical understanding of art history and iconography. And one of the examples of something that was overlooked, for example, by art historians, is the iconic whale. The whale, it has a very deep meaning in general in the Christianity, because basically it was torn apart in half at the moment of the death of the Christ. And this curtain sort of tradition, it was initially found in Jewish liturgy. And in Jewish liturgy, it was a boundary. It was a boundary within the temple between the sacral spaces and more sacred space, even more. Sort of, they also had this like a little bit, I call it like a little bit video game logic. Yeah, you You walk into the space, like if you're out of the church, it's just profane space. If you come inside the church, it's a sacred space. And then in the sacred space, there is even more sacred space that is being hidden by the veil. And this veil, this curtain, cannot be crossed by anybody. It only can be crossed on particular days by particular priests who has access to this. So it's sort of a very complicated thing that points out to the existence of something higher, even higher than the temple itself. And this was adopted also then by a Christian tradition, and opened this access sort of, because when the Christ dies, basically what was inaccessible because he sacrificed himself becomes suddenly accessible. Now that's it, like the curtain is torn apart, turned into parts, and the truth reveals itself. What has to be was hidden, what was not be possible to see, to touch, to experience is now possible. And Lidev analyzes this motif of a curtain and comes to the conclusion that basically curtain, it's not just isolated single image or object. It's a spatial vision that unfolds in a prayer environment between the image and the viewer. And this is a completely different way of talking about the sacred spaces. Because sacred spaces becomes a multimedia installation. It becomes the whole, that different parts are working together and they cannot be broken down to the familiar art historical categories. Because, for example, traditional art history always has this iconology. So there is a motif, and this motif we read, we decode like this and that. And Eurotopie and Alexei Lidev basically says, yes, okay, but for example, with the curtain, we cannot say that it's motif because it's never was an actual a written rule. There is no unified type of how you're supposed to do it. There is no sort of handbook. It came into completely different forms, and it cannot be just interpreted as that this is a symbol of this. But sort of this is the thing in itself that creates a space, reveals the space, and worked as this mediator between different words and different realities. Now you can ask, what does it have to do with contemporary art? And it is a very interesting question for me, because Alexei Lidev and his concept of Eurotopie, it's basically tied to Byzance, Byzantia, so early Christian times. He was an art historian who specialized on that time period, and he never actually was doing anything about the contemporary art or modern art. However, he himself pointed out to the potential fruitfulness of the link between this early Christian way of viewing the sacred space and what is going on in the contemporary art practices. I'm just gonna read one of his quotes. It is noteworthy that Byzantine spatial icons, and one of these examples is the curtain, most unusual in the modern European context, have a typological parallel in contemporary performance art and multimedia installations, which have nothing to do with the Byzantine tradition historically or symbolically. What they share is the basic principle of the absence of a single source of images. The imagery is created in a space by numerous dynamically changing forms. The most significant is the role of the beholder, of the visitor of the space, who actively participates in the recreation of the spatial imagery. All the differences of the contents, technologies, and aesthetics notwithstanding, one may speak about one and the same type of perception of images. However, the aspect just touched upon here shows how far can we go in our analysis of topical approach. And this link I find also quite fruitful in my own approach and in my own writing about contemporary art and sacred spaces, because Lidov, he even adapts in order to analyze early Christian art practices. He even takes the term installation, that is the term that first of all, we know from contemporary art. So he takes the term from contemporary art in order to analyze for example, Byzantine altars, that we see here on the left side. And why does he do it? Because what if we think what is altar is just basically an assembly of a random objects from the world that people put together and created some sort of like a special meaning towards it. They arranged, they say this is now the performative act, this means this means that. It creates a special sort of space connection to the space that is not here, that is not material, but it is material through these forms, through Christ, the most obvious candles, and so on and so on. And basically, this seeing this attempt in the modern art practices, this parallel to Byzantine practices, is make also sense in a way, just if we look at the concrete examples as well. Because, for example, the works of Bill Viola, the video artist, his work you can see on the left. Unfortunately, I didn't really had an opportunity to show the whole video because it would take too much time. But he's one of the sort of brightest examples of this, and Lidov also writes about him that it's possible to also speak about his work in terms of affects that are deeply Byzantine in his essence. And precisely because of his devotion to the idea of the sacred, some contemporary curators find him very challenging. Although he comes from the Catholic tradition, Viola has lived a significant portion of his life in Japan. He was greatly struck by Zen Buddhism and doesn't insist on a strictly Christian interpretation of his work. On the whole, this Byzantine special icons prove far more relevant for contemporary art than the painting of the post-Renaissance period, for example. But this we will also discuss a little bit later. I just wanted here to sort of to make a point that the link does exist, and moreover, the more we analyze the works of Bill Viola or Marina Abramović, the more we understand the way they work is also they don't work with one single image or with a flat image. They involve the whole sort of space also around them and work on creating the space, not imitating the space, not presenting in a one isolated image, but creating the space within their work. And now I would say that it's, for understanding of the topic, is quite important to dive down a little bit in general to see the relationship and very complicated, very shifting relationship between the art and religion. Because, I mean, as I already said in the beginning, the oldest works of art, they were created with a purpose to serve a ritual, a magical one, a religious one, when religion started to be institutionalized. But this was the way how art functioned. And this ritual function was not separable from the object. Then, however, actually happened 6 centuries ago. Well, basically the day, a few days ago, if you look at the history. But what happened? Okay, this shift happened. This cultic function undergoes secularization, and the thing is that art is finally autonomous, art is finally independent, but there is the best, there is the worst artist, and so on and so on. So it builds the hierarchy, it builds criteria, and the goal of this is to serve sort of the purpose of the beauty and the ideal of the beauty. And Benjamin also sort of points out to this shift that art from communication, from the goal of communication with a higher sphere, turns to the communication of its own greatness, in a way. And a very, very similar approach we find at Hans Belting. He's a German art historian. And in his book, Likeness and Presence, he distinguished between also these 2 different modes of how art functions. Moreover, he even gets more radical. He completely refuses to use the word art to anything before the Renaissance, basically. And to call it cult objects. And basically these 2 different distinctions that I also have, of course, the time frame, basically. They represent absolutely different ways of functioning. What he calls sort of the age of the image, which is this time period before the art comes, before Renaissance. He make it clear that basically the image was not an aesthetic object, but a living medium, a carrier of presence, power, cult, and sacred energy. Images were used in rituals and treated as living creatures, literally. They could walk around the town, like here we see in Italy in Ferragosto, the ritual of carrying the Virgin Mary as if she walks herself, like as she is, her presence is real. It's not a representation. It's not the statue that is being carried around. It is she, literally. It's her presence. And also, as we see at the example at the left, the also absolutely genius way of illustrating how actually people back then understood and viewed images. We see basically, also the Virgin Mary that is coming out of the wall and literally takes the key from the city. While there is also a little bit farther still an image of her as well with the baby cries. So, but this one flat. So they even coexist at the same time. So this sort of special kind of reality that the pictures had, and this appearance of the sacred invisible form, this was, so to say, the way that this age of images function. However, as we already as I already mentioned, the new image that comes within this era of art that Belting called is bound to general laws of nature, including optics, and thus assigned to the realm of sort of sensory perception. The image was no longer subject to any laws other than those that applied to natural perception outside the image. Viewed in this way, it had become a simulated window. Yeah, and we all know, understand of a Renaissance art, for example, as a window. Yeah, the picture as a window, in which both the saint and the family member could appear in a portrait form. And the new image was released to the artist who recreated it from his inner imagination and fantasy. And this is also where the figure of the artist comes to the center of the stage. Because, as is also mentioned before the Renaissance, artist was not important. He didn't sign his work. Nobody cared about that. Nobody was thinking, oh my God, this is Leonardo da Vinci, the greatest, and nobody knew their names. Their role was to create a mediation object that would communicate. But it was not about beauty, it was not about how it's done, and yeah, it was about who is it, in a way. And this is the age, basically the Renaissance is the age where the artist's idea, concept, creation, this all began to be very important categories. Because basically a work of art from then on, it's not anymore this presence, the real presence, it's representation. Yeah, so from the real presence, art turns to the representation. And the representation, the other categories become important. The categories that before were not in the center, the categories of how it's done, of how does it imitate reality, of optical illusionism, and so on and so on. And this transition from the object of worship to an expression of the idea, sort of beauty and divinity. Well, if that's so, what's the point then to talk about contemporary art in the sphere of sacrality, divinity, and so on and so on? If we are already in this second shift, where art is art, and art for its own sake, and art is important just because it's sort of protects its own autonomy from the world, then there is no place for any religion, yeah, if it doesn't function anymore at this mediator picture. However, Mircea Eliade, who I quoted in the beginning with his concept of hierophany, he recognized that even though, yes, there was this shift, it has taken place, however, this cultic meaning of the image does not completely disappear, but it reappears in a new configurations. This is not to say that the sacred has completely disappeared in modern art, but it has become unrecognizable. It is camouflage in forms, purposes, and meanings that are apparently profane. The sacred is not obvious, as it was, for example, with the art of the Middle Ages. One does not recognize it immediately and easily. It is no longer expressed in a conventional religious language. And he makes the link between the non-representational movements of the art of the modern artists, for example, Marc Chagall or Constantin Brancusi, whose picture you see at this time, and the religiosity and archaic sort of ways of thinking about the object. And he says, quote, "From Cubism to Taschism, we are witnessing a desperate effort on the part of the artist to free himself from the surface of things and to penetrate into matter in order to lay bare its ultimate structures, to abolish form and volume, to descend into interior of substance while revealing its secret or larval modalities. These are not, according to the artist, operations undertaken for the purpose of some sort of objective knowledge. They are ventures provoked by his desire to grasp the deepest meaning of his plastic universe." And this, what he calls, so once again, what is he saying is that the sacrality, the feeling of the sacral and the desire to go deeper than the world that is already there and the reality that is already there, it still exists, but the form that it takes, the form has changed. And it's become, so to say, the quest to find the unrecognizable sacred. This is how he calls it, the quest to find unrecognizable sacred. And the thing is that the great majority of artists, they do not sort of have faith in a traditional sense of this world. Yeah, they don't belong openly or sort of purposely try to highlight their belonging to a particular church institution. So, and this is the difficulty of this topic, because we talk also about transformation of the art, but we also talk about transformation of the feeling of spirituality and religiosity and sacredness per se. Because this process of secularization, which basically sort of happened with Enlightenment, 6th and 7th century, where the science sort of replaces this importance of the church values, and becomes, the rationality becomes, basically the science becomes a new religion in a way. All these sort of scientific rational approaches, they also led, in the sphere of art, they also led to rationalization of the artistic practices. But however, for example, if we look on the avant-garde of the 20th century and of the pioneers that invented the abstract language of the art, they all, which is Hilma af Klint, for example, whose work you see on the left, she didn't even spoke of her artworks in terms that it's art. She spoke about it as a spiritual practice, as an object of some spiritual inner work. Kazimir Malevich, also obviously, if anybody ever read whatever he wrote, it's absolutely the deepest, carries the deepest religiosity within it, and not the orthodox one, not the institutional one. This whole black square, red square, white square, this is all completely sort of, this reduction of the form, the abolishment of the form, and the white square as this last step of basically where the form transcends in itself, where forms that it cannot express anymore, because what it expresses overcomes the form in a way. Kandinsky, I mean, also I think that doesn't even need a commentary. He literally wrote a book about the spiritual in the art. So this is all also persists there. And especially in the 20th century, where also the theoretical trends of theosophy, animism, shamanism, various practices of spiritualism that were also mostly adopted from the West, they were reflected strongly in the visual vocabulary of its time. And in the post-war period, art was also mainly concerned with engaging in a dialogue with the avant-garde. So the post-war art, the art of the 50s, 60s, and so on, avant-garde was always this horizon that they look up to, which also says that this initial spiritual content of the avant-garde also actually can be traced down in the art of the later. And this is interesting, complicated topic, however, and this is why there is a lot of definition. You constantly sort of need to agree with yourself as a researcher, what do I call sacred? What do I understand under the word sacred? And it is of course can be viewed from countless amount of different perspectives. However, I still prefer the Mircea Eliade interpretation, which basically talks about hierophany and understands the sacred basically as this other space, as the space that is fundamentally differs from everyday, from our everyday profane experience. It has its special ontological status. However, we can communicate with this. We can, there is this point when these realities, as I already said, they come together. And you can, for example, trace it down very easily in early Renaissance art. For example, the example that also already showed about the icon of Maria, literally sort of entering the space and getting the key. Or with Giotto, for example, in his frescoes, there is always this, in early Renaissance, this angels, these creatures that are going literally from nowhere, He doesn't have the other side, as you can see in the space. So he enters this inside space, doesn't have a body on the outside of the building. And what Eliade says is basically we need to have a dialectical understanding of the sacred, which is, it is an object from our profound reality that, however, forms and opens up another reality that is usually hidden and inaccessible. So this portal, sort of. And this is an understanding of the artwork as a portal, not as a representation, not as a flat image, not just as a pure visual form, but as a thing that opens some other dimension. Why do we need it? Why do we need this opening? Why do we need sacred? Do we always have sacred? And this is a very interesting also questions in my opinion, because we are living in an age of secularization. And well, I don't think that many of us on a regular basis, think about God or religion or spirituality, or some sort of like opening to divinity. Of course, no, we don't have this category strongly in our heads. But however, if you start to thinking about this, we all have these special places in our memories, or still physically, this one special street, that brings us to these memories. We do have this special time. We do have this special object that has a very sort of significant, deeper meaning for us. In a way, this consciousness, this religious consciousness, never actually got away from us, but it started sort of to be migrated into different forms. And how Eliade also sees it, why do we need sacred, is because, not because we want to escape reality, and this is very important argument of my research. While I'm talking about the sacred, I'm not talking about escapism from reality. I'm not talking about going to a magical fantasy world or like watching Harry Potter or something. No, the essence of the sacred is actually to get closer to reality. And this was always the initial function of any religion. Because basically we are all we are born, we live in chaos. When people put the stone somewhere in the center and they say this is not just a stone, this is the center of the world right now. From the chaos they made cosmos. They made an order. They made a space that is centered and that is safe in a way. And it has nothing to do with escapism or alienation. It basically has to do with now this is here real. It's an attempt to go through the boring everyday life that every day is the same. What's the point of it? There is a feeling that there is something beyond that. And religion and basically art is, of course, always has been initially working as this agents of this, of making this space, of making this cosmos available, of bringing this truth closer to us. I hope it's understandable. It's a difficult matter to talk about, but also if you have any questions, we can discuss this. Now, in the age after the death of God, so-called, that Friedrich Nietzsche announced. It's a different era from the era that we were talking about when we were talking about the religious sort of function, the cultic function of art. And the researcher James Elkins, and also art historians, he claims, for example, that religion hardly has a place in a modern art world. Quote, "The separation has become entrenched. Religion is seldom mentioned in art schools and art departments, partly because it is understood to be something private, what I'm going to call spiritual, and partly from a conviction that religious beliefs need to be brought into the teaching of art. Aside from rare exceptions, religion is seldom mentioned in the art world unless it is linked to criticism, ironic distance, or scandal." And this is where sort of the paradox is especially noticeable. So when we talk about, for example, contemporary art education, the topic of religion is treated, as James Elkins also signifies, is treated with very carefully and still with the distance and still with more as this is a private matter. And it's even cringe in a way, if you sort of purposely, as an artist, deal too direct with a religious topic. At the same time, a lot of absolute superstars of the art scene, Marina Abramovic, Bill Viola, Olafur Ellison, they all do create a space that basically absolutely resembles the Byzantine altars of the early Christian religion. And this paradox gets even more complicated if we look in general, again, right now, what's going on with the relationship between art and religion. And this is what I called cathedrals as museums. This is a very interesting example, in my opinion. I was recently in Florence during my art historian internship. And in Florence, in the, I think it was Basilica di Santa Trinita, you have this gorgeous cathedral with Renaissance frescoes that if you want to look at, you need to put €2, and then the lights will go up, and you can look at it for 4 minutes. And I was absolutely fascinated with this principle. It's just, and it's a church. It's a church. It's not a museum, it's a church. So it's a space of worship. It's a space where these frescoes supposed to function not as a picture to look at in order to understand if it's beautiful or not, but as a communication with a higher reality. And now, of course, it's obvious that you don't pay to euro to pray in front of this. You pay to euro because this is a famous Renaissance art that you want to take pictures of and post somewhere, and so on and so on. And at the same time, contemporary art also comes inside of the church space. This is just one of the examples. This is Gerhard Richter in Köln Cathedral. But this is just one of the many, many, many. When contemporary artists that still lives also takes a special sort of orders for the church. So the church also starts to sort of instrumentalize and use contemporary artists as a way to, well, in a way also to communicate with the public, to show its progressiveness, yeah, to also in a way get some aura of the museum to church. At the same time, we have an absolute worship of this genius art masterpieces, yeah, where people literally go as pilgrims. It's a pilgrimage, yeah. I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna see her, I'm gonna see this one and only original, and I'm gonna feel something incredible, and my life will gonna change once and forever when I'm finally in front of this Mona Lisa or Botticelli or whatsoever. And then there is also a specific space of the museum space, gallery space, that also is important sort of to take into account when we talk about this interconnection. And I'm talking about the white cube, which basically made a museum space sacred in itself. I'm just gonna read the quote of Bruno Dougherty, who theorized this in the 60s of the last century. The ideal gallery keeps all references that might interfere with the fact that it's art away from the artwork. It shields the work from anything that might hinder its self-determination. This gives the space an enhanced presence, as do other spaces in which a closed value system is kept alive through repetition. A gallery is built according to laws as strict as those that apply to medieval church. The outside world must not be allowed in, which is why windows are usually darkened, the walls are whitewashed, the ceiling becomes the source of light, the floor remains either polished wood, so that every step can be heard, or it is covered with a carpet, so that one walks silently and the feet rest while the eyes are fixed on the wall. And Dougherty, he goes even as far as to claim that this aura of the gallery space, it resembles literally a church. That exhibition design creates this cultic aesthetic experience. And the impact of such space is very, very strong, and that art outside, sort of outside its boundaries, immediately falls back into the secular profane dimension. So once the object is put out of this white cube, there's a big question if it actually sustains its status as an artwork. And I'm just gonna try to quickly sketch basically my main points and my main examples that are more concrete than what we just discussed now, because before basically was an attempt to build a dialogue based on what are the frameworks, what are the concepts, how can you talk about this subject of contemporary art and religion in the sacral spaces. And surprisingly, minimalism plays a very, very big role in my understanding of it. Basically, it is surprising because minimalism, it's an attempt to reduce the form to its radical formality, to its radical simplicity. So it's single symmetrical object, no pedestal, no support, no monuments, no frames, just geometrical, pure geometrical form in the real space. Moreover, the main theoretiker of minimalism, for example, Robert Morris, he himself insisted that minimalism, it's anti-transcendental movement, yeah? For example, he says, at 30, I had my alienation, my skill saw, and my plywood. I was out to rip out the metaphors, especially that had to do with up. Yeah, so sort of meaning sort of when we look up, yeah, in the sky, as well as every other whiff of transcendence. When I sliced into the plywood with my skill saw, I could hear beneath the ear-damaging whine a stark and refreshing no reverberate off the four walls. No to transcendence and spiritual values, heroic scale, anguished decisions, historizing narratives, valuable artifact, intelligent structure, interesting visual experience. So this is quite manifesto. And especially this manifesto completely culminated into the phrase of Frank Stella, also one of the members of the minimalism movement, who said, what you see is what you see. This is what minimalism is about. So it's complete rejection, not even of the meaning, yeah, of interpretation. The object that you see is exactly what you see. There is no transcendence, there is no attempt of the higher meaning of the symbolism, no. So quite radical. However, even though minimalists wanted to sort of insist on this literalism, yeah, of the thing is the thing, that's it. However, art historians and art critics of its time did not actually agree with this. And Michael Fried, one of the sort of the main opponent of this movement, he viewed minimalism actually as a theatrical objects, as objects that are very dramatic, that are literally made you feel their presence quite heavily. Moreover, they usually have a size, sort of anthropomorphic size, yeah, the size, the same height as a human body, human proportions. So you basically have to react to them as some sort of a actual living form. And he points out that the minimalist sensibility, it's theatrical because, to begin with, it is concerned with the actual circumstances in which the beholder, yeah, we, the audience, encounters this work. By refusing the pedestals, minimalist objects are not separated from the viewing space, but are actively rooted in it, influence both the environment and the perception. And this effect is not only physical, but also psychological. The theatrality of Morris' notion seems obvious. The largeness of the piece, conjunction with its not relational unitary character, distance the visitor, not just physically, but psychically. And this is what he calls a kind of a stage presence, that basically the minimalist objects, they act as actors on the stage. And Georges Dudy-Huberman, another philosopher, French philosopher, still quite present in his writings and art theory books and writings, he noticed that both the Stella claim, what you see is what you see, is absolutely idealistic. This is impossible. And he rejects, but he also rejects the Freud sort of accusation of minimalism as being too theatrical and of being manipulative with the viewer. And he says the following: although they meaning minimalistic objects, minimalist artworks. Although they represent a visible, evident order, namely a certain geometrical clarity, they quickly become non-evident objects. Objects that are able to present their complexity as a hint of emptiness. For these sculptures are, all in all, only boxes. Their visible volumes are perhaps only significant because of the empty spaces they allow us to imagine there. Ultimately, they appear to us as blocks of latency. Something rests or hides invisibly within them. A black interior that, when presented visually, forever destroys the manic certainty of what you see is what you see. So basically, what Didier Berman is saying, that minimalistic object that was trying to be so literal object, that tried to refuse any kind of interpretation, any kind of sacrality, any kind of transcendence, is in a way become an incredibly sacred object. And this is the very interesting paradox of it, because it has this dialectical quality in it. Yeah, there is this simplicity. However, it reveals itself. It is a black cube, but it also hides within itself. So it shows by hiding, and it's hiding by showing in a way. And that makes us sort of wonder about the relationship between what's inside, what's outside, the exterior and the interior. But also there is this tension between the industrial material that minimalists are famous for using, because they had also incredibly sort of utopian view of industrialization and were romanticizing quite heavy the appearance of the new materials. But this mix of industrial material and then archaic reminiscences of Egyptian temples, for example, that Tony Smith has a direct link to. This paradox, this abstractness of form, but then human proportion, that also Michael Fried pointed out. So this constant tension that has been created, this contrast and the feeling of distance, so it is there, but it's also very far because we don't know what's inside, creates in a way a new sacred language, according to Didier Berman, to the point that he basically says what Michael Fried called theater should be called aura. Minimalism works with new cult objects. So this is new cult objects, Didier Berman says. And with the realization that modern works should not be characterized by decline in sacred, but rather produce something like a new sacred form. And then he points out to the sort of link between the fragment of Fra Angelico, this is the early Renaissance painter, the empty Grabe, gosh, I forgot the grave, thank you. Yes, the empty graves, yeah, after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, with the Donald Judd object that was made within the minimalism paradigm movement. And minimalism is, for me, a very, very important movement. And I chose it quite purposefully, because we rarely think about it, but in a way minimalism basically rediscovered the simplicity of form. The less you say, the more you say, in a way. Yeah, the more minimal form, the more sort of imaginative, the more sphere of space for imagination and wondering it opens up. And minimalism, I would even go as far as to say that minimalism basically changed completely the way we think and we look at art. Because first of all, it got rid of the pedestals. So it got rid of this frame, of this distance from the real world. Minimalism put the artwork in our space, in the same space as where we are. defining ourselves. So there is this presence of the object. We are not distant from the object. There is this space that was before neutral, it became real, the space between the artwork and us. And moreover, the minimalistic sort of discoveries in this way, this insistence of literal presence, corresponds also incredibly with the religious art, with this insistence that we are basically in the same space, but this object, they are open up also a space in its own. This is here, I just wanted to represent the examples of the post-minimalism, which, as you can see, I mean, in that sense, every art is post-minimalism, because installation art also is born from minimalism. Yeah, the sort of the real object that stands in the space. But the artists after minimalism, in a way, still took this geometrical form, or the repetition of the same object, for example, like Eva Hesse, or the forms of cube, like Smithson and Jackie Winsor. But they distance themselves from this coldness of minimalism, yeah, of this sort of desire to eradicate any touch or any form that is more complicated, yeah, than just sort of a straight geometrical lines. And the post-minimalism art is in a big dialogue, finds itself with a big dialogue in this. But as I wanted also to wrap in this lecture up, I just wanted to present the main character of my master thesis. This is the artist Wolfgang Leib. He's a German artist, still present with us. The artist who actually claims that what he does is an absolutely spiritual praxis, which I found very interesting and very bold thing to say, given the contemporary secularization, and given how also skeptical art institutions are usually in this regard. Wolfgang Leib is also very interesting in a sense that he uses also minimalistic repertoire. He uses the language of minimalism, but he discovers this irrationality in it. He really saw and he really took this irrationality of this rational form and refused this Frank Stella, what you see is what you see. He focused on a return of the meaning. What is also very interesting about his art is that he absolutely stable in what he does. Once he discovers some form, he's going to repeat it enormously. So basically his installations, they start in the 70s, sort of after he also already, of course, was influenced by minimalism, because by 70s minimalism is a canon already. It's an absolute history in itself, formed and sealed. But at the same time, what he started to do in the 70s, he does constantly with the repetition. He never changes it. So basically his installations, they just constantly reappear. They never actually change. Also, as it's supposed to be in the minimalism, his work is grounded with a pedestal, or without the pedestal. So there is no, again, any distance between the real world and the physical space and the art space. And he uses also a very interesting mix of material. This is milkstone, one of his earliest work that he started to do, which is made of white Carrara marble with a sort of shallow sort of gap in it, which he then pours milk into it. which you can see sort of on the second photo. It's more clear what how the process looks like. So geometric form on the ground. However, this is where the similarity with minimalism ends, because Carrara marble doesn't refer to industrial materials. It refers much more to Renaissance, actually, and to the old sculptural tradition than to modern mass production. Then there is this aspect of pouring the milk into the work, which is a deeply ritual aspect. So basically, the milk sort of spilled on the marble surface, and symbolic heritage of the milk being spilled stretches from pagan cults to Christianity, to the image of Madonna lactans, the feeding Mary, milk as the first food, and the figure of the mother as the creator of life. But when we speak also of contemporary sacred spaces, of contemporary erotopy, we're not referring just to specific religious tradition, but we also refer to the affect of this gesture of spilling the milk in itself. Significantly, when Alexei Lidov, the author of the erotopy, he speaks of modern ways of how the sacred reveals itself, he refers to the cinema of Andrei Tarkovsky, and in particular to this recurring motif of the flowing or spilled milk. This motif is presented in almost every Tarkovsky film, and as Lidov notes, in the slow motion of the milk spilling across the table, we see an image that refers us to another reality. So in Tarkovsky movies, every time the milk is being spilled, it's not just milk being spilled, it's not just what it's exactly happening, it's always opens up and signifies that there is some other spaceness, this other dimension, that things are not what they seem. Yeah, how David Lynch says the alls are not what they seem. And this is again sort of brings me to the Iliade concept of sacred as this holy other, a reality that is not of this world, but it manifests itself in an object that are integral part of our natural, profound world. And for example, in Tarkovsky's Sacrifice, the fallen milk, the bottle of the fallen milk marks the boundary between the everyday and the intrusion of the supernatural. While in the Mirror, the overflowing milk becomes a symbol of slippage, milk that slips signifying this inner transformation that takes place beyond the visible. And in a similar way, Leib's installation can be understood as this dialectical image in the sense of Georges de Duberman. They are evident, they are at the same time what they are. It's a cube, it's white, some sort of liquid surface on it. However, it materializes this void, that the viewer encounters in this shared space and cannot ignore. The spilled milk becomes a symbol of duality, of the beyond, what physicists would call the fourth dimension, the intrusion of this otherness. In its function, this resembles the moment, I'm almost done, sort of suddenly this other reality enters the everyday space. And just the last installation that I want to also shortly just unwrap, it's rice houses. They depict the little houses made of white marble, archetypical house form that evokes associations with medieval relics of Muslim, also gravestones at the same time. Here a phenomenological moment comes into play. The lightness and airness of the form creates tension with the physical heaviness of the stone. Leib again here combines sort of this minimalistic structure with organic materials, and they at the same time sort of literalist. They are what they are. It is rice and it is house, but they are self-evident, but at the same time also they have this wealthy symbolic connotation. But at the same time, this symbolic connotation is free from his own personal reference. It's not a personal biography. He's not one of those artists who tells his own biography or his story through his art objects. No, the goal, the desire lays in a completely different place, sort of. His attitude, as he says in his own world, is close to this early Christian icon painter that we discussed in the beginning, yeah? He doesn't see himself as autonomous, completely as genius creator, but rather sort of as a mediator who brings the divine to to be visible in a way. And for example, he says, trying to create the beauty, it's a tragedy. You can only participate in creating it. And this is deeply early Christian Byzantine mindset, that I'm not a creator of the beauty. I'm somebody participating in its being revealed in a way. And he says, there is much, much more than myself than I could ever make myself. Eliade, for example, describes how cosmic sacredness manifests itself in the animal and plant world as well. And the parallel to Leib is also quite obvious here. The materials he uses are integral elements of our natural profound world. But in this artistic configuration, they cease to be identical with themselves, but open up other reality that continually refers to a multitude of interpretation. In the Orthodox tradition, for example, rice symbolizes resurrection and the attainment of new life. And it is also a central dish that being served on funerals. Rice on its own can already sort of be regarded as a hierophany. But Leib, on the other hand, he configures it with the form of another hierophany, this medieval reliquary that also resembles the house, by combining sort of one sacred code with another. And precisely this gesture, this combination of archetypical forms and profound materials, as rice, imbued with sacred connotation, that his installations can be recognized as a special modes of contemporary project by creating a sacred spaces. He deliberately avoids names or any symbolic sort of titles. The installation usually called as basically what they are, a rice house. But at the same time, he doesn't serve to a specific God as well. Yeah, his intention is not to create a new language of Christianity or Zen Buddhism, or to create some sort of a religious within the institution. Yeah, religious according to some particular book that exists out there. This is more evoking associations. Yeah, sort of. And this is again where I draw the parallel to Tarkovsky, for example, yeah, with the sand dunes from Stalker. This is a space sort of filled with artificially arranged sand hills, and it's in a way very simple. It's quite minimalistic. It's a simple form. It's a sand, but they create at the same time this other worldness that is coherent, sort of to create a break within the reality. And basically, yes, my claim again, sort of starting from the beginning with the erotopy and with this refusion from just one image and from a flat image, this sort of insistence that also Leib has to create not a single object, but rather a holistic environment that comes close to what Alexei Lidov describes as a spatial icon, sort of the icon that is in the space, that marks the space, that forms the space around itself. To reduce things to their most essential, simplest form, but still leaving fragments of mystery in the visible, which stubbornly slip into the sphere of inexpressible. Mastering minimalism as a language, Leib does not use it to liberate the world from meaning, but on the contrary, as a maximally open field for transcendence, and construct a sacralized but not institutionalized space in which the everyday rice, milk, in other installations he uses pollen, wax, becomes a gateway to create a space where the viewers could find themselves contemplating. And I think I will stop here because it was a lot of information. But I hope some general main lines were somehow catchable in this, in the narrative that I tried to present. And also, if you have any questions, be happy to answer and to discuss, because, as I said, it is a topic with a lot of complexity and with a lot of thinking about the definition of the terms and what is sacralic and what is religious and what is the spiritual experience and what role the form plays in it. But I think it's still very important to talk about this. And also partly because I feel like it's not being talked enough in art historian discourse that usually sort of just reduces itself to the limitation of the form, of the formal analysis, instead of also trying to see the things in a more sort of dialectical way. But anyway, I'm open for feedbacks, and if you think it makes sense, if you think it doesn't make sense, yeah, thank you for listening.
So maybe I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think this essence of sacredness is always present in every artwork?
No, I don't think so. I think, this is also what is the sort of why this area of knowledge is quite complicated, because there is, from one side, the artists who are trying quite consciously and saying about that their intention is to create some sort of a sacred space. And there are artists who don't say this at all, but actually you can feel that this is exactly what they're doing. So they can claim there is sort of, there's this gap between the artists who claim that they are sort of reference to the sacralic spiritual experience, but in a work itself, I don't know, it can be just a painted Christ. Yeah, they can claim that, but for me, this is not enough to claim that you're creating a sacred space. You are creating sort of a representation of the commonly used, institutionalized symbol of the faith. It doesn't mean that you create the space. And there are artists like Olafur Ellison, for example. He's not very talking much about religion, or he does talk about spiritualism, but very vague and very abstract. He never uses the word sacred, but if you look at his installation, you immediately understand that what is he trying to do with his installation? He is creating this feeling of the other spaceness, absolutely consciously and absolutely purposefully, to make the space that is radically different from ours. The space that is ephemeral, a space that is sort of non-existent in a way. And so it's in every particular case, I'd say, not in every artwork.
Maybe I will continue on this question and your idea on it, because you mentioned Olafur Ellison, but I mean all light and space movement is quite sacred for me.
Yeah, for me too.
And because because
Yeah.
it's not the object, it's the environment you have to enter.
Yeah,
You use it
exactly.
all around, and
Yeah.
the form is even more minimalistic than like the minimalistic movement by itself,
Mm-hmm.
for me at least. And
Yeah.
the feeling from those artworks kind of even feels for me even more sacred, maybe.
I agree. I honestly also think that in general, this turn to immersive installation and light installation is deeply connected with this sort of desire to enchant the world again, in a way, yeah, to not to rationalize or deconstruct the world, but the tendency, the opposite of it, yeah, the tendency sort of to create a more mysterious world, to the atmosphere that is, yeah, non-ordinary in a way. And for sure, this is one of the lines that are usually not viewed like that, because usually art history sort of interprets this as, well, yeah, the artists, they discovered the space and they decided to do something interesting with the space. They discovered the light. Yeah, okay, they discovered all of it, but we need to also analyze the effects of which the work produces and why it is produces this way. And for me, the theory of the desire to create this other space makes much more sense in this regard than just artists discovered that light can be used in installation. I mean, good for them, but
I would like to return to the picture of Wolfgang Leib pouring the milk. I don't really understand if it is a performance or installation, or how does his work works.
yeah. It is usually, of course, it's a deeply ritualistic in its nature, the process, but this is not being performed to the audience. So he pours milk as a part of a montage of the process of setting the installation space. He doesn't do it in front of the viewers. And sometimes even like the curators do it, yeah, or other people if he's not on the side of the exhibition. The other thing that I forgot to mention, that the milk is actually sunk into the stone. So it doesn't stay always like this. There is this also, yeah, the feeling of the time. It's like the time, while the time passes and the milk gets sort of penetrates the stone. Which is, of course, in itself, you can interpret it as a performance in itself, sort of, yeah, like this, how's this called? Installations that are changing with the time, yeah. But in a way, it is also a ready sort of object. So he doesn't perform in front of the viewers in that sense.
Maybe I have a question. I don't know if I can put it together
Yeah.
in a good way. But do you think that this artist puts or makes the art like the portal, like you said before, like for the?
Yeah, this is my claim, basically from the interviews that I've read and his diaries, his personal writings that I've read. Well, personal writings that are published, not that I stole his diary. And he understands himself also in many ways as this early Christian object-making process. So what he's trying to do, he's not showing sort of an object in a way, oh, I made it, look how beautiful it is, yeah, or I made it, look how philosophically deep it is, or how it reflects the capitalism, anthropocentrism, decolonization, whatever. No, it's for him, like, how do I create a form that make people stand there for a long time and just be there present with this form. So he's trying to create a form that is not just going to be a form for its own sake, but supposed to put you in a specific state of experience, an experience when you has to contemplate some sort of inner state should go through the outer visual form, which is difficult to talk about because it is like a very complicated materials to describe with words, but this is how he views it, yeah.
But it's a longer question, I'm sorry. Do you think that he makes this artwork like a portal, like by the idea he has in his head? Like if somebody else comes to the marble and had the milk and didn't have the idea in the head and just pour it there, just without any idea, it would has the sacred energy it has if it's made with the idea.
If it changes something, you mean if there is an initial intention already or not?
No. If you think that the idea on the beginning, like the whole concept about the art, brings the energy to the art, that makes it so sacred.
The idea, once again, the idea that
Wait a second.
it's complicated.
Přes tebe, ano. Ne, zkusit jako přes někoho dalšího, kdo to třeba, protože ta myšlenka mezi klapem to. Takže to nemám ještě úplně pohromadě. Jestli jakoby to, že měl na začátku tu myšlenku, jako ve smyslu toho kamenu jako symbolu pro, no jakoby, ne úplně symbol, ale toho mléka třeba v kontextu toho mateřství a podobně, jakoby, jestli on jako ta postava do toho pomocí toho vkládá tu energii. Kdybych tam přišla já, byl by tam prostě ten kus šutru a nalila bych tam to mléko, aniž bych jakoby přemýšlela nad tady tím vším, jestli by to stejně v těch divácích vyvolalo ten pocit té svatosti v podstatě, nebo nějak jako nadpřirozena.
Yeah, if like maybe if you imagine like the same things, but one with the intention and one without the intention, if it's like the difference.
If like the viewer would feel the difference, like the one wouldn't feel sacred and the other would feel sacred because the intention is, the energy of the intention is in it.
I think the intention for me is not even that interesting. I mean, for me was, of course, in a way, interesting that he has this intention, and in a way, how is it being realized in a visual form? So how does he view, this intention to be sort of materialized now in a secular age, in the age, sort of free of the religious dogmas and so on and so on. But in general, I think I also said already, there is art that I find sacred and it's not intended. Or the artist never felt or never thought about this in these categories. Now if we talk about this particular artwork and the question is sort of, would I feel it that it's sacred if I didn't know that it is? This is another question. The difficulties, unfortunately, of this particular research is that with the installation art, you have to see the work directly in the space. It doesn't make sense, really, to show it as a flat image again, isolated and sort of in the distance from you, because it's supposed to be communicating with you and to be with you in the same space. And until this didn't happen, I think it's more difficult for sure to say if it's working or not. But intention is, the author is dead, the God is dead, the author is dead, the artist is dead in a way. Like, I do believe that the sacred form, the experience of the form can be different from the artist's intention, for example. Yeah, and this is also a very interesting case, in my opinion.
I have a question, but maybe kind of follows up on what you just said about like sometimes the artist doesn't intend to create a sacred piece of art, but how much do you think it depends on the viewer? Like, because I think artists are more dependent
Yeah,
on viewers than they want to admit sometimes. So like, how much do you think?
completely dependent, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes, yeah, this is sort of why a minimalism chapter in my master thesis is so important, yeah, because this is basically the movement that broke this wall between the artist, between the creator, the producer, and the visitor, because basically there is no frame, there is no distance between the work and my physical presence anymore. And I am the one who making also the meaning of the work. And I'm the one, so we are basically me in the artwork, we now share in the same space. And this, what is with me in the same space, it's gonna influence me. Once I'm rejecting this postament or the frame, I don't have more sort of this means of distancing myself from that, as that this is like, yeah, something that's, well, it's art, yeah, art is art. No, then suddenly when it sort of comes so close to you, you have to also feel the influence of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what was the question?
Well, I think I meant more like if a person that is spiritual comes to view this art, like a specific piece of art, and a person who is not spiritual at all, for example, like would they, well, I guess they wouldn't feel the same, but like would the sacredness of the art like changed from one that
From the perception of the person.
Or, yeah.
For sure, I think always, but at the same time, why I'm insisting on some sort of objectives in this regard is because again, if we come back to the definition of the sacred as this sort of holy other, yeah, something that is a part of our world, but not exactly. So this already puts us into the frame of thinking about art in this terms of a sacredness, in a way that, for sure, it's always a question. Yeah, what do we mean about the spirituality? Yeah, and like, as you said, yeah, for example, people who are not spiritual, they will not think about it or feel that, and so on and so on. But for example, what PŘEDNÁŠKY claims is that there is no such thing as people that they don't exist. People that are not spiritual.
Yeah, I guess people don't think about it, you know, because you have to. For me, at least, I'm not like, I don't consider myself very spiritual. So when I have to like intellectually focus on the spiritual meaning of things sometimes. Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But like, it doesn't come like so naturally to me as perhaps some other people. So that's why I was like wondering if the sacredness of the art is like how much does it depend on the person?
I think you do feel, if you enter the installation, yeah, or if we talk, yeah, again, sort of, or even the performance of Marina Abramović, or you do feel that this is something that functions on a different level of reality. This is, yeah, it's spiritual, not in a framework then, oh, I see it and I feel divine touch, energy, I don't know, connection, God exists. No, not in these categories, yeah. It's more in these categories of this, that artists are consciously, like Wolfgang Lepfer as an example, consciously want to create a space that the aim of the space is to put the viewer into the contemplative state, the state of the sacred. Now the question is, does it work with everybody? Is very interesting, and maybe there is a way to somehow measure it, or like to, you know, put some sort of a sociological like questionnaire. Did it work out? Did it not? Yeah, like this is also for sure very interesting. But the insistence on sort of on why we can call it a sacred contemporary sort of erotopia, contemporary making of the sacred spaces. Yes, intention for sure is there already, because Wolfgang Leib writes himself places himself, yeah, his art in these categories, but as well sort of what the form is telling or not telling, or does not. And for me, I think what was important is this discovery of the minimalistic form as this language that fits to talk about transcendental, exactly because of his abstractions. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a question about something you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I closed the pictures.
You mentioned that a lot of this stuff is very sort of paradoxical and contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
And you quoted someone, I don't remember who it's from, but he said that anything before the Renaissance.
Yeah, Hans Belting, Walter Benjamin.
Art.
Yeah.
But the more you talked about sort of contemporary art and stuff like that,
Yeah.
the more I found sort of similarities in the motivations and impulses of artists, of contemporary artists with those of the past before the Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to ask, what's your view, and whether this sort of split between before the Renaissance and after the Renaissance exists regarding religious art, and whether I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, basically?
Yeah, the shift definitely exists. The thing is that it's more complicated than that. So this sort of institutionalization of art, sort of as an atomic sphere, started happening sort of within the 15th century, within the Renaissance, and it was the process that basically was developing. It has different stages. For example, the appearance of the academia with its strict criteria. Suddenly art has a particular categories, a particular way of doing it, the right way of doing it, the criteria of beauty, perfection, idealia. 19th century academy is it's a structure that basically where art does function as a religion in itself, basically. So art worships art, art for art. If before it was sort of more as a portal, as a mediator, as a communicator with this other world, to the religious sort of consciousness, then it becomes in itself already, it becomes obsessed with itself in a way. Then avant-garde, or in general this sort of switch, 19th century, 20th century, art sort of understands that there is this limitations that needs to be also we need to overcome this. This is where sort of all those avant-garde movements, Dada, and Surrealists, the appearance sort of performance, of scandal, this desire to go into the real life back, in a way. The desire to sort of stop just being sitting in academia and making gorgeous, beautiful landscapes or the most realistic sort of historical paintings and so on, but sort of more go into this real life, social realm and so on. But also what I find really interesting is that avant-garde at the beginning of the 20th century art had incredible amount of the reference to the spiritualism, and especially the Eastern spiritualism. So I think the switch was definitely is, and we still live in the era of art. We don't. It's not like we came back to this age of image, that Hans Belting says, where this era before the art, where the images were functioning as presence. I think some artists, some contemporary artists, are going into this direction. Like some examples that I also basically named: Marina Abramovic, Wolfgang Leib, Olafur Ellison, Bill Viola. But still, we do exist in the where art is a separate realm, a separate autonomy, a secularized realm. And this is why it's also so difficult to talk about these topics. They're not very welcomed as well in the sphere of contemporary art, because there is this sort of view of a religion as dogma, as tyranny, as a problem, as something repressive. But I do believe that we also need to reshape this view a little bit in order to understand also better some of the intentions of a contemporary art, in order sort of to also understand it more deeply in a way, not just sort of as a history of change of styles. Because this change of styles was also highly motivated by some desire of finding another way of experiencing things, another way of seeing things, another way of spiritual. It is a spiritual practice. So, I think it's important to try to develop the language where we could talk about it. Sort of not to be reduced to the just, critical deconstruction of everything. So it's my point at least. Yeah.
Why do you think the religious kind of sacred is the same as the art sacred?
The religious sacred is the same as the art sacred.
Yeah, because in the past we had this sacred that depicted these religions, icons and everything, and now we can see that some kind of sacred is also present in the new contemporary art, but I don't know if it's the same kind of sacred or...
Well, I mean, once again, the sort of the definition of the sacred that I take the one from Mircea Eliade, and his definition of it is sort of quite clear. It's this break from the profane, from the ordinary world. Like in Giotto, something comes suddenly, or the icon, something just sort of comes alive. In the contemporary art, this tendency is also viewable, when suddenly there is this break from what just surrounds us usually. This desire to create this other spaceness. So this other worldness, this other spaceness, this intention is the same as in early Christian art as in contemporary art. So the intention never disappeared in a way, it just transformed visually, just functioned visually differently. And this is why Mircea Eliade calls it, it's the quest, it's the challenge to find this unrecognizable sacred.
So maybe if there is no more question, we would like to thank you very much. It was a very interesting topic, and we would like to invite all of you to the exhibition, which is tomorrow, maybe on the...
Maybe I can switch to English, to the Czech, because the rest of English part knows it. Anastasia tady není jenom z nějakého náhodného důvodu, kurátor nám výstavu, kterou máme v galerii N. Propojili jsme školy, hale a tulky a byli jsme rádi, že jste dorazili zítra v 5 do Jablonce na naši výstavu, na které jsme pracovali cca půl roku, než se to celé jako uspořádalo a byli jsme rádi. A teda ještě si můžu asi říct to, že se věnuje tématu očekávání